Anybody's life feel like a swamp right now? Kind of dark and gloomy and nasty. We've been talking about the fact, if I could have some house lights out here so I can see everybody's beautiful faces. Talking about the fact that in life's swamp, there are gators that seek to consume us and devour us. 7 of them in particular, which I think are what we would call, I'd almost call keystone sins. Sins that are gators or sins. They're kind of using those two things interchangeably. Things that seek to destroy us and just eat us up alive. We're talking about this concept of the 7 deadly sins in this series, or 7 gators. And these 7 things are things that I believe that if we could learn to master in our lives, that a lot of other things would fall into place for us in our lives and in this new year. 7 of them. So we're kind of in the middle of the series right now, and today we're going to talk about a sin or a gator that I think is pretty tricky. It's one that can silently creep into our lives. It's one that can numb our passion and numb our commitment. It's the gator or the sin of sloth. Sloth, S-L-O-T-H. Now, sloth and laziness are pretty much synonyms. You can swap those 2 words out for one another. Pretty much mean the same thing. But as I was thinking about how I would talk to you about this particular gator this week, I had a couple thoughts. Number one, I thought to myself, well, we're a church full of hardworking people. I believe that. We got a lot of blue-collar folks, hardworking folks, and so I want to just commend you for that. I don't know that we have a big issue with people being lazy in terms of work ethic and those type of things. Maybe we do, but maybe we don't. I think we've got a lot of good, hard-working folks. The second thought that I had is, though, how much we waste time and waste energy on things that we have in our culture today that we don't even realize it. Things like watching TV, binging Netflix. Your favorite series comes back out with a new season, and you sit down and you watch the whole thing, and time wastes away. It takes the place of things that you could be doing, and there are things that are probably more important that you should be doing. Before you know it, you've wasted so much time and so much energy on stuff that doesn't even matter. I do think that we have an issue with laziness and sloth in our culture, especially when you think about it and you look at it from the standpoint of, it's not just about laziness in terms of how we think about it. It's also, it can mean indifference or neglect. I think there are all of us have things in our life that we're indifferent toward, that we shouldn't be, that we should care about like as a 10 or 11, but we care about it on about a 2 level. Oftentimes that's our spiritual life, isn't it? There are things in our lives that we neglect to deal with, we neglect to handle. And those 2 would fall under this heading of sloth or laziness. We're so used to convenience in our culture, aren't we? And I just think about how our culture is continually trying to figure out ways to enable us to be even lazier. How many of you enjoy not having to go into Walmart and pick up your groceries, huh? They can bring it out to the car for you. I like that. Not necessarily a bad thing. Not a bad thing, right? It can be a good thing. It can save you a lot of time. Actually can save you money because you don't go in the store and buy stuff you don't even really need, right? But it's another example of our culture helping us figure out ways that we can be a little lazy. I think about stuff like DoorDash. Anybody ever use DoorDash? Anybody ever done that? We have it here. We don't have it as much, but in other towns they have that, or Uber Eats. You can have food delivered to your house. You don't have to get out and get it. You don't have to cook a meal. They'll bring it to you. Oftentimes we find ourselves slothful or indifferent, or we neglect the fact that some of us have health problems. You know you need to go to the doctor. You know you probably got an issue, but you're just like, not that big of a deal. That's neglect. That's indifference, and that creates a problem. A lot of us, we find indifference or neglect in our relationships, especially in terms of communication. Instead of going and seeing somebody physically and looking at somebody face to face, it's easier to send a text, isn't it? Which I appreciate that. I mean, listen, that's the thing about these things. They're not necessarily bad, but if we're mastered by them, it becomes an issue. There's no human-to-human physical contact anymore. It's all done over our phones. I think that another issue that's happened because of the indifference and neglect that's becoming prevalent in our society, the sloth, is that there's less involvement in things in the community. All kind of community programs, community events, community things for youth, good things that we'd love to see happen in our community, but yet, and we'll talk about this later on, there's nobody that wants to help out. We all want good stuff, but we don't want to be a part of the solution. Some of you have maybe seen this at the workplace. You neglect. You see indifference. You see neglect because so many people have the mentality of, I'm just working for the weekend, right? I'm going to do just enough to enable me to go do what I want to on the weekend or go out and have a good time on vacation. That mentality, it's not a good one. Because we know the word says that we should work at everything as though we were working for the Lord. And that's not what that is it? Neglect. And obviously because of that, people shy away from new challenges and opportunities to grow. Not a good thing. Video gaming. Anybody know anybody that games a little bit online, huh? Not a bad thing, but it can consume our lives. And we become so passionate about that thing that we become indifferent to other things that actually matter in real life. Surfing the internet, social media, those type of things can eat up so much time that we could be using for more meaningful things, just scrolling mindlessly through TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever your favorite is. The reality is, for most of us, if we are presented with an easier way to do something, we are going to take advantage of that, aren't we? We're going to shy away from anything that would cause us to push ourselves. And I think that's the mentality that we're getting at this morning when we talk about sloth. We talk about laziness. And here's the crazy thing. I think as bad as it is right now in our culture, it's going to get even worse. You know why? There's this thing that's happening right now called artificial intelligence. It's been going on for a long time, but it's really become prevalent in our society, I guess, in the last year or so. I think in the future, AI is going to make it super easy for us to get lazy. It is. Think about it. We'll have all the machines doing all the work. They'll be driving us around. Anybody got one of those self-driving cars already, kind of, sort of? Has some of those features in it? I got one. My wife does now, and I was playing with it the other day. It works pretty good. You can almost just sit back, it'll drive itself. It's nuts. It's crazy. We have those things now. We have people doing shopping for us. We've got machines that sort out our schedule. Sounds great, right? Yes, maybe. The reverse side of it, the flip side of it is that letting AI handle everything also causes us and will cause us to be lazy. We'll begin to stop bothering to do things ourselves. Why would I solve a problem? How many of you, whenever you were in school, if you can remember this far back for some of you guys, Some of y'all, did all you guys have calculators whenever you were in school? Maybe some of you did. I don't know. I know whenever I was in school, we had calculators. And when I was in math class, I'd always have to ask myself the question, why do I have to learn how to do this whenever I have a calculator? Some of the students are like, amen, right? That's the mentality, isn't it? I don't need to learn how to do this equation or figure this out. I can just type it in to the calculator, and the calculator will solve it for me. Why do I need to solve hard problems? Here's why. I think all this stuff, all this technology, all these new things that are causing us to be able to have more comfortable, more easy lives, what we lose in this is our get up and go. We lose our drive. We lose our passion, our knack for figuring things out on our own. And that's not good for us as individuals, and that's not good for us as a society. Last week, we talked about the gator, or the sin of gluttony. That was a fun one, especially for me. Talked about that, and we referenced the sin of Sodom. You guys have heard of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's pretty infamous couple towns there in Genesis in the Bible. They're famous for the destruction that was brought upon them because they had such an evil society that God said, enough's enough, and I'm done with you. And he wiped them off the face of the earth. And we said last week that most folks mistakenly think that the major sin or sins that were being done in Sodom that caused God to be so angry and want to get rid of them was sexual immorality. That's what I've always thought. But in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, we're going to read it again, the word tells us differently. It says that Sodom's sins were pride, talk about that one, gluttony, that was last week, and laziness. There's the third one. While the poor and needy suffered outside her door, she was proud and committed detestable sins. And God said, so I wiped her out as you have seen. I think the story of Sodom, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a warning for us all. It shows us what can happen when a society is so much into comfort and so much into living for themselves and so much into pleasure and leisure that it forgets what really matters. We can assume some things about Sodom based off of what we know about them in Genesis. Sodom was built in a very fruitful area. Very productive ground, very productive soil. The people there probably led pretty good lives. They probably had the easy life because of that. They had wealth. They had the ability to chase after pleasure. But the problem is it made them lose sight of the things that really mattered. They probably stopped valuing hard work. And obviously, as the scripture says, they forgot how to care for each other. And most importantly, when that happens, and when it happens, when we start losing the ability and the desire to care for each other, then we also lose our connection with God. These people in Sodom, they were on an endless hunt for the good life, for the pleasure-filled life. And that hunt, that excursion, that desire for that ultimately leads to the morals of a society totally falling apart. Sound familiar? These people became selfish. They only looked out for themselves. They ignored others that need help. And society fell apart, piece by piece. Now this morning I bring this story to your attention once again because I believe it is a mirror in a lot of ways of what's going on in our own world today. Hopefully, we will wake up and see what happened in that society and understand the danger that we face whenever we go on this pursuit of pleasure, this pursuit of comfort, this pursuit of leisure in our lives, and begin to walk away from that. Begin to see that, listen, that's empty. You can obtain pleasure. You can obtain leisure. You can go to every vacation spot in the world that anybody would ever want to go to, and you still will not find the satisfaction that you're looking for. Matter of fact, you will see your life go the opposite way. You will see your life crumble. There's a danger in living a life of sloth. It leads me to ask you the question, and I hope that you will wrestle with this today. Are you living your life right now for your pleasure or for God's pleasure? It's one or the other, I promise you. Are you living for your pleasure or for God's pleasure? When we begin to live for our pleasure, and we begin to try to live these leisurely lives, these lives of comfort, it makes us blind to the things that really matter. And it takes us away from really living in ways that give God pleasure. We forget the values and the virtues that are so important to us. We'll look at a passage today in Proverbs chapter 24. Once again, we're going to look at Solomon, King Solomon. Most likely, he was the one that wrote this passage. Wisest man probably to ever live outside of Jesus Christ, King Solomon. And in Proverbs 24, we see him telling an interesting story. A story that I think will lead us to talk a little bit about the dangers of neglect and indifference in our lives. Look at what Solomon says. He says this: I'll walk by the field of a lazy person, the vineyard of one with no common sense. Common sense. What's that? I saw that it was overgrown with nettles, and it was covered with weeds, and its walls were broken down. Do we need to talk about walls this morning? Borders, fences. Don't mess with Texas. Verse 32. Then as I looked and I thought about it, I learned this lesson: a little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. I don't want that. Scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. Imagine someone whose backyard is a jungle of weeds, overgrown and out of control. But they're just chilling inside, hanging out, watching Netflix and scrolling through their phone. We should have an altar call right now, don't we? Huh? Yeah, I'll be up there in the very front of that one. Imagine that. That's the picture that we see being painted in Proverbs chapter 24. The picture of the sluggard. The sluggard has a messy backyard, a lazy person. I would tell you this, folks. You can put yourself in this story. Why? Because all of us have a backyard, not just physically, but we all have a backyard in our lives that we are called to look after. If we just lounge around and ignore it, things are going to get messy. There's going to be weeds that come up, little problems. Those things are going to grow, and they're going to grow fast, and they're going to overgrow fast. Walls will be broken down. Our discipline will go out the window, and negative influences, because those walls are broken down, will quickly come into our backyard. Some of us neglect our yards at our house, which that's a big deal. We shouldn't do that, right? We should take care of what God's given us. But more importantly, some of us neglect, maybe all of us in a sense, neglect the backyards of our lives. What's that look like? How about this? Your spouse is your backyard. You neglect your spouse, him or her. You don't spend time with them. You don't care about them. You don't do anything for them. You neglect it. You don't protect them. You don't pray for them, pray with them. And if we're not careful, something else will creep in as our walls begin to break down. Don't be surprised if outside influences come in and cause problems in that situation. You know, the divorce rate in Christians, so-called Christians, is just as high as it is in lost people. That's crazy to me. That shouldn't be so. That's an issue. Why? Because we neglect this backyard. Another backyard, obviously not just our spouse, but our kids and our family. Listen, those of us that have kids right now, the way that you treat your kids, the things that you allow them to do, allow them to be a part of, you may not see any negative results or consequences of that right now, but I can almost assure you that later on, you will feel that pain. If you neglect them, if you don't love them, there's going to come a time in your life whenever they have to take care of you. I wouldn't neglect them if I was you. I don't encourage you to worship your children like some do, worship the ground that they walk on if they think that they can't do any wrong, but certainly you must give them attention, you must give them love, and you must help them with boundaries. Children need boundaries, guys. And listen, that's different for every family, but especially in this world today. It's so sad. There's so many teens, so many kids that have complete access to anything they want in this world. And it kills them spiritually, mentally, and maybe even physically down the road. Think about it. Another thing that we neglect, that's our backyards, our finances. We don't want to think about that, do we? You neglect that. That's sloth. That's being lazy. We neglect our health. We've already talked about that. And the last thing, and probably the most important thing that we can find ourselves indifferent to, is our soul. And that's the one thing that we so often neglect, that we don't need to neglect. More on that later. The point is this: as we neglect our backyard and we become indifferent to things and we become slothful in our lives, life just passes us by. We miss chances. We don't take responsibility for things that we should. And our life wastes away. I'll tell you, once again, like I told you last week, don't waste your life. Proverbs isn't missing words here. King Solomon is telling us straight. Being lazy, being indifferent, neglecting things, it's going to hit you hard, like being mugged by a bandit or mugged by poverty. It's not just about losing a few bucks. It's about losing out on what can make your life rich. And we're not just talking about money. Matter of fact, we're not talking about money at all. We're talking about the abundant life that Christ died to give you. It's a wake-up call for us this morning. A warning siren going off is telling us, hey, get up and take care of your business. Look after your life. Look after your relationships. Look after your faith. Look after your worth, your work, because if you don't, it's gonna go south. It will. And we know that right here, but somehow, some way right here, we don't get it. You know, one of the things that I think we really battle the most in our culture today in terms of this topic of indifference and neglect and really just laziness, I think that we live in an entitlement society. We do. It feels like everybody's walking around with an invisible crown on sometimes, thinking the world owes them something. Guys, the world doesn't owe you anything. We see it at youth sporting events where parents are more invested in arguing with the refs because they made a bad call, or maybe they had it out for their kid, or the coaches that are giving their time to volunteer often or the energy and effort to be a part of your child's life, we see it. We focus on that instead of enjoying the game and enjoying the fact that we get to watch our kids participate and make it an enjoyable experience. People think that their child's going to be a pro athlete or something. There's been like a handful of pro athletes that have come from this area in the last 50 years, all right? Probably isn't going to happen. You're not entitled to that. Just because an official or referee makes a bad call on your kid doesn't mean it was a personal attack. Also, in terms of the entitlement society, we think that we're all entitled to have this great community, to live in this great place, and we should have all these amenities and all these things that we would love to see here in our town, in our communities, in our county. But yet there's not people that are standing up to volunteer to make those things happen. I think that this entitlement society is basically killing volunteerism. It's hard to get folks to volunteer to do anything these days. It's a challenge. And I think part of that is the fact that we feel like we're entitled to something, that we deserve something without having to work for it. We expect others to do the heavy lifting. It's like we're living in a world where inconvenience is the new injustice. You know, even in church, this attitude can creep in. Can I step on some toes for a second? Is that okay? Some of us may attend church services expecting to be entertained rather than to participate in what's happening in the body of the church, in the life of the church, and in the worship experience. My personal favorite, and I've heard this a time or two through the years, people say, well, you know, I'm just not getting fed at church. And my response to that is, excuse me? Are you a baby? Do you need somebody to feed you? Because babies need people to feed them. It got quiet. We want the church to meet our spiritual needs, but we don't want to put in the personal work of building our own faith and our own devotion. The reality is that this entitlement culture has turned a lot of people into a bunch of spoiled brats. None of you out there, but other people, right? Other people. We're getting so used to having things handed to us on a silver platter that the ideal of working hard for something just feels outdated. But folks, I would tell you this is important. The real faith journey that Jesus has for you, that he has for me, is not for the faint of heart. It's a journey that takes guts. It takes getting your hands dirty. It's raw and it's real. And this entitlement mentality, it fits into our Christian life like a bull in a china shop. It don't work. You know, for quite some time now, we've been seeing this trend where people of God like to treat him like he's a slot machine. Let me just put something in, and then I'll get something out. I think that mentality is so offensive to God. That's not who he is. Of course, you got preachers out there who promise big returns on investments in faith, right? Investments. These guys are prosperity teachers, preachers, and they sell the ideal that God rewards faith with financial blessings. And guess what? It's effective, because who doesn't want financial blessings? Unfortunately, it leads many to see the relationship with God as a transaction rather than an actual journey of faith. And of course, when the expected dividends from God don't materialize, it ends up shaking their faith and leaving them wondering where they went wrong. What happened? It's the mindset of, listen, God, I've done what I'm supposed to do, so I deserve this. Why haven't I gotten that yet? And yes, I would agree with you that it is God's heart and it is God's desire to bless you. He wants to do that. He wants to give you abundant life, but there's no guarantee that he will do that financially or in your health. We pray for that. We would love that. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. The reality is we don't deserve any of that. Romans 6:23 said it very clearly that the wages of sin, what we deserve because of our sin, is death. That the free gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. That's like a splash of cold water, isn't it? We're so busy sometimes demanding blessings from God that we forget that what we actually deserve because of our sin is death. Listen, guys, God's not running some kind of cosmic Amazon where we're prime members and we're entitled to next day blessings. He's not doing that. We forget that what we have already received from God, if you're a believer in Christ, the grace, the mercy of God, the ticket to eternity, man, that is the best gift that you could ever get. Way better than any kind of money or any kind of good health or anything of this world. God's grace is not a birthright. It's a mind-blowing gift that we don't deserve. We need to walk away from this attitude of I deserve something or somebody or God owes me something. It's a toxic attitude. It's offensive to God. Why? Because it's a direct challenge to God's sovereignty. We're basically telling the creator of the universe that he's got it wrong, that he owes us more. And this attitude, it hinders our growth, our spiritual growth, and it warps our understanding of grace and mercy. What happens next? We end up wasting our lives on a superficial faith, thinking we're all good, but really we're actually just sleepwalking through something that should be dynamic and life-changing. And we miss out on what it really means to follow Jesus. Folks, can I tell you something about Jesus? Jesus was not lazy. He wasn't lazy. He was the complete opposite of that. And we understand that we as believers are to follow in his footsteps. He was not a lazy guy. He was a hardworking guy. Man, he took it on the chin so many times. He didn't have a place to lay down all the time and hang out and watch Netflix. He didn't have that. He was not lazy. Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 through 8 says this way, that though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. Wow. Well, as we close today, I want to just read something to you I think will challenge you. You've been around church for any length of time. You've probably heard a sermon preached on this topic, on this passage. Revelation chapter 3. It's a letter. It's actually a warning to the church in Laodicea, a church that was actually spiritually lazy. And God says this to that church and to these people. He says, I know all the things you do, that you are neither hot nor cold. God says, I wish that you were one or the other. But since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Wow. You say I'm rich. I have everything I want. I don't need a thing. But yet you don't realize that you are wretched and you are miserable and poor, blind and naked. So I advise you to buy gold from me. Gold has been purified by fire. Then you will be rich. Also buy white garments from me so that you will not be shamed by your nakedness. An ointment for your eyes so that you will be able to see. And God says, I correct and discipline everyone I love. So be diligent and turn from your what? Indifference. We bow our head and close our eyes this morning. In this flu season that we're in, this season of sickness, I would encourage you to think about your spiritual temperature. Are you hot or are you cold? God's message to this church in Laodicea was, hey, you're lukewarm. And that ain't cutting it. It's not cutting it. Some of us, we've just kind of been going through the motions with our faith. This morning, God has come. And God desires to wake you up. He wants you to be on fire for Him. He wants you to be on fire for His church. So God, would you convict our hearts? Would you lead us to a place, God, where we will be living in that passion? Once again, that we probably all experience once or twice. God, would you shake things up today? Would you take our faith off of autopilot? God, we want to go all in. For somebody else in this room, you've been indifferent to faith in general. Basically, the truth is you have never, ever decided or made the choice to truly follow Jesus. In that same passage in Revelation 3, if you keep reading in verse 20, God says this, look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together. Those who are victorious will sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat with my Father on His throne. That's an invitation to you today. Would you let Jesus Christ come in, lost person? The person's never been saved. Today is your day. It's time to set aside indifference. You've been neglecting God for too long. You are not promised or guaranteed anything outside of this moment. Don't waste your opportunity today. As we sing this last song, I'm going to invite you to stand. Stand with us. Have the house lights come down a little bit. If you want to make Jesus Christ the Lord of your life for the first time, there are people here up in the front that would love to pray with you about that. Speak to you about your walk with Christ. You need prayer for anything else, they're here as well. Guys, we serve a holy God. He desires all of us, all from us. And Father, we adore you this morning. And our desire is to be on fire for you, not indifferent. God, would you fill us with zeal and with passion for your word, for your truth, and for your Son. And then for the people around us that need Him. Father, thank you for your sacrifice, your Son's sacrifice. We are so blessed. So blessed. And God, would you forgive us when we do things that offend you, and we drift away from you, and we don't live the kind of passion-filled lives that God, you desire from us. Help us to master this sin. We want to walk away from that in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.